home stretch. Thanks for staying. I wasn't sure how many people would actually be interested in capital campaigns, but there are a number of reasons why every congregation needs to do it. My development director at the seminary for a number of years, he just retired with me, said that there's no such thing as a capital campaign anymore. Every nonprofit is in a perpetual campaign. And as a matter of fact, you don't even use the word campaign anymore. We'll use it, but he advised using the word initiative. So in other words, the goal is going to change all the time, because if our analysts are right, your needs, your constituencies are always going to change. Everybody's a donor. You have property needs, you have ministry needs. Someone just came to me and told me how they use the ministry, the narrative budget around the 5 forms of ministry, and use that to make their case, right, for ministry. So in other words, we are always making our case. We are always in a kind of campaign. So why just talk about a capital campaign, right? Let's learn the methodology, the planning for these initiatives. Take for example what I began earlier this morning. If you were awake, saying yesterday, I was at a fundraiser for Lutheran Settlement House of Philadelphia, and the executive director did a campaign for new security doors, in a setting like this, right? Raised $12,000 in 1 minute at a breakfast. You see the point, right? There was a need, the need was clear, boom, it was done. So that's what John Quacken would describe as the fact that we're always doing initiatives and we're always in campaign mode. Is that clear? Simply because our needs are outpacing our way of supporting. You used to do a whole lot of things right out of the operating budget, right? Yeah, sure. We always look to the past and think that was golden. It wasn't, right? It is just, the times were just different. But there may have been more resources, right? There may have been more loyalty. My wife and I will frequently say that there must not have been any old people in the early days, because so many of our churches were handicapped and inaccessible, right? The seminary is paying about $2 million right now. That's one of the things that my friend who I was telling you about with the big pile of brochures is helping to do, just to make the library handicap accessible. Some of you have been there know that it's got about 13 steps to go up, and no elevator inside. What were they thinking? But my wife will always say, in previous days, old people just became shut-ins, right? And so they stopped going to church. And the church was built. And, as you probably know, and I may have said this earlier, Lutherans were just darn cheap. Because if you look at many of our churches, they were built on small plots of land, usually hidden. The Episcopal church is in the center of the city, the Presbyterian church is usually there, the UCC church is there. You usually can't find the Lutheran church, right? It's off the beaten track somewhere. And, in this redevelopment course that we teach, Jack Risch, who's the ELCA building consultant, says it's because Lutherans are so darn cheap. We always go looking for the cheap land, and the cheap land is off some side street and we were a relational church because everybody knew where to go, right? Now they don't, but then they did. And then because we bought small plots of land, we built up in a lot of our churches, and so the social hall is down below, and which was true of my church in Baltimore, the sanctuary was up the top of a winding staircase that you had to be pretty nimble not to fall down to get from the social hall right up this circular staircase. Some of you are nodding. You probably have had the same architect. So we're now in perpetual mode because with a lot of these old structures, we have to redesign them for a new age, right? And we have to do things that we didn't do before. So what I wanted to say a few things then about what I have learned in this perpetual mode, right? So I'll talk about capital campaigns, but mind you, this has multiple applications. Everything from getting an elevator, to putting new doors in your church, to making it, I said that, by handicap accessible, to maybe a new ministry you want to start, right? Could involve a campaign. And the important thing to know is that you've got to get people together to make the case. Now, you've heard me say this ad nauseum, but it is stunning to me to see how many agencies, synods, institutions, congregations just miss that fundamental step. In other words, if you want to raise money, people have to know what you're raising money for. You're nodding. It makes sense, but that's hard to do because just take the most recent. It's a wonderful one, right? But the ELCA $200 million campaign, right? There are so many things in it that you want to get your head around some of them, and it'll be a success. They're doing pretty well. But in some sense, right? If you're going to do a campaign, you have to say no to some things, in order to be able to get something done. And you might say, we'll do this later, right? But because we're all guilty of niceness, and we're become very democratic as congregations. We'll say, okay, we're going to do a campaign, and somebody will say, but we need to do it for this, right? And nobody in the room wants to say, but we can't do that right now, right? We need this. So what it means is you've got to fight a little bit to put your case together. And be very, very clear that, okay, we're going to build we're going to renew the Christian education wing, but we're not going to buy choir robes at the same time, right? We're going to rebuild the Christian education wing, but we're not going to do X and Y, right? Do y'all follow, right? Because we're trying to do something. Now, that may not be what you want to do. You may want to have a campaign for more ministry capacity, right? That's a perfectly good reason. You might want to have a campaign to do programmatic things, right? And so then you say, all right, we're going to do it for youth ministry. We're going to do it to hire an associate pastor, maybe hire a full-time pastor, right? Maybe you can only afford a half-time pastor. You want, right? You want to be able to have the capacity to actually have a pastor, right? So there are multiple things, but you have to be clear so that donors know what you're asking for. Is that helpful, right? But that again is work. That means sitting down and seeing exactly what you need, writing it up, and then the most difficult thing, and I find that's where the rubber hits the road, and that is that you actually have to put it, in a brochure or on paper. And then when so this is when we did the $21 million Rosman campaign for the seminary. When you have to write down, right, and say exactly what you want, then you start going, oh my, we weren't that clear. And when you have to pay to publish it, then you start going, oh my, I'm not sure I want to pay for this fuzzy idea, right? And so you've got to sharpen it. And if it's not sharp, you've got to go back to the drawing board, because if it's fuzzy, when it gets out there, it's only going to get fuzzier. And I can't say that enough, because I watch campaigns that are around in synods and all, and you just sort of say they didn't want to make the hard decision, right? They said yes to too many causes, and so it's a camel, right? Or it's moving forward, but it won't move forward. And a lot of campaigns or initiatives, notice I'm using that word, right, in two ways. A lot of them fail because of that. The second thing you need to do is you have to do a feasibility study. So you can have a wonderful idea, right? This church needs to renovate its Christian education wing. Does anybody care? Right? If nobody cares, if only the pastor and the Christian education folks care, it's not going to happen, right? You've got to, first of all, find out what it's going to cost to do it. And other people here are probably much better at this than I am, but you should at least multiply by a third, John, right? So let's say, to renovate your Christian education. And that's conservative. Let's say times two?
Sometimes, yeah.
So, especially in New York, right? So let's say it's going to cost you $800,000. It's probably going to cost you $1.6 million. To do what you want to do. And so, therefore, you had better have a plan, right, for financing. Are you with me? Right? So you know all the stories in the New Testament about kings who want to build, right? And all you see is foundations. We saw a lot of that during the recession, right? That it just didn't work out. Now that was because of the recession. But you need to count all the costs, and if you don't do that at the beginning, you're gonna have major problems, which is going to include your estimators, your contractors underbidding, right? They always underbid because they want your job, and it's only when you get deep into the project that they're going to say, "I'm sorry, I underestimated by 100,000," right? And you're going to say, "Too bad. You gave me a guaranteed maximum price," and they're going to say, "I'm going to go bankrupt. You're going to have a project there that won't get done." And so you're still left holding the bag, right? So you might settle saying it's going to be 50-50, or we'll pay 50, you swallow 50, but you're still 50,000 over, right? Your 1.6 that you planned for. So you've got to plan for all contingency, including interest, right, and payments, so you wind up with a small mortgage afterwards. Otherwise, it's going to affect your ministry as a congregation afterwards, because you'll have a burden, of a nice building, but no way to afford a pastor or sustain the ministry. So in a feasibility study, you go to your best, I'm going to use the nonprofit term, donors, right? And you say, "Can we have lunch?" And it cannot be manipulative, right? It cannot be manipulative. I want to talk to you about whether we think, now, you're a donor, right? I know you're a donor, but I'm not going to ask you for how much. I'm going to say, how much do you think, right, you might give to this project, right? And you'll say, "Pastor, I could care less." That's important information, right? I think we need X, right? So you see, you may be refining your case as you're doing your feasibility study, right?
And where are you going to go for lunch?
Pardon?
And where are you going to go for lunch?
That's right. Yeah. So that's what the feasibility study does. It refines your case, right, and your proposal, and then you come back after you've seen your key people, and here is the hard rule. You all know this. I'm telling you things you know. 80% of your members, 20% of your members are going to give 80% of your capital campaign. And some people are even saying it's a 90-10 rule, that 10% are going to give 90% of your campaign. So now you're gonna all tell me, all these folks are on fixed incomes. We can't we can't worry, right? We can't. Well, what the issue is, you won't do anything if you keep swirling around, right? In that, because everybody will be given an opportunity to give, right? But you have to start building a pyramid, but that comes about in the feasibility study. And if your lead donors, don't get you up to 60, 70%, you've got to do what's called value engineering. And that means you might build, the new Sunday school wing, but you don't build any classrooms. You might, I'm teasing, right? But value, you know what value engineering is, right? You just decide you're going to do something simpler than if you're going to do it at all, right? Than the dreamers plan. So you've got to then find. Now you've not asked anybody for a pledge, right? You've just simply tested your internal market. And that market might be wider than your own members. You have friends, right, who are beyond the people who worship with you every Sunday. It could be people who are wealthy and who are affluent and use your building. And you've cultivated them, and this person will say, without Ascension Deer Park, this community would never be what it is, right? Yes, yeah, I'd be happy to give $100,000 to this project. So what you need to know is it's not necessarily just your members in a capital campaign. It could be all of those who are in relationship to the congregation. Do you understand? Right? And so that you have lots of friends. I was on the board of Lutheran World Relief for 12 years as a member of the board. And I was on the development committee. And most of LWR's funds comes from what they call nominal Lutherans. These are people who grew up Lutheran. They don't worship. They don't cross your thresholds, right? Except maybe Christmas and Easter. But they think of themselves as Lutheran. So when Lutheran World Relief, is facing a major disaster, right, in Indonesia or the Philippines or so, and they put the word out, the money just pours in from nominal Lutherans. So who are the friends, right, that you have that are in your circle? So what you'll want very quickly then too is a steering committee, and the steering committee has to work. They have to then think about all of the relationships. As if you're going to do this project, if the feasibility study says we're going to go, all right, then you put a steering committee together of very well respected people in the congregation. There may be somebody from the community who's on that as well, who'll be an advocate for you. But these have to be people who will maybe go with the pastor, or go 2 by 2 and do the major asks. And so if things move on, then you're in what's called the silent phase of the campaign. You really haven't made a big to-do about it yet. You're in a silent phase. Do you at any point in this time hire an outside consultant? My answer would be yes. Why? Because just like is argued in Consecration Sundays, an outside consultant is going to keep you honest. But now, of course, it only depends on how much money you're going to raise. If you only want to raise a small amount of money for a particular project, right, for capital improvement, you're not going to want to spend all kinds of money on a consultant. But if you're building a major wing or a new sanctuary or whatever you need it, and it's in the hundreds of thousands, yes, you need somebody, because they will keep you disciplined. Because no matter how motivated you might be, the reason it used to be called a campaign is because it's like a military campaign. And you're going to move forward and have setbacks. You're going to move forward and you're going to have setbacks. And there have to be strategies, right? And you have to always come up with new strategies. He said no, who are we going to go to now, right? And so you need a committee that's going to brainstorm with an expert who can take you through that. An expert will also help you to think about a variety of instruments that you can use to raise money. Someone came to me during the break who had to leave and just sort of said, you know, what you didn't talk about were in wills and estates giving were those of us who are getting over 70 and we have to start spending money from our IRAs. You know, is that possible to give money to the church? Well, yeah, right? Of course. You know, that's just something I didn't think of. You know that issue, right? That when you reach, what is it, 70 or?
70.5.
See, I'm not there yet. I don't know. But yeah, when you're 70 and a half, you've got to start spending, right? And there are any number of members of your congregations who would get tax deductions, but they have to know they can give that, right? And the ELCA Foundation would be most helpful, you know, in advising you how much you can spend and how much, you know, what the tax advantages would be for somebody to do that. So there are all kinds of instruments by which congregations can raise significant sums of money that you might not even think of, because most people just think, you know, a campaign. You know, let's say a Christian education building, and it's going to cost us $1.6 million, and people are going to give us checks, right? And the checks are going to come at a regular time. These days, assets can come in all in a variety of forms. Let me just basically tell you what is you know, what a capital campaign is really about. If you come to me and say, you know, Dr. Krey, Phil, or, you know, depends on how well you know me. My daughter, you know, is doing a bicycle trip, you know, for muscular dystrophy, you know, and she needs a sponsor. Would you sponsor her for $100? I'll pull out my checkbook and I'll write you $100. But if you're doing, not you, but, you know, anyway, but if you're doing a capital campaign for $1.6 million, right? I have to think about my assets. I'm going to have to sell stock, right? Or bonds, or dip into my IRA, or I don't have, you know, $50,000 or $60,000. He does, but I don't have $50,000 or $60,000 just sitting there, you know, to which I can write a check. You follow, right? So it's work, and you may have to talk to people about how they can do what they can do, and people can tell each other what it is they can do, right? Now, what you don't want to do, and a whole lot of institutions, including seminaries, got themselves in trouble with this in previous campaigns, is mix the previous topic, which was planned giving, and campaigns. Because, and you heard me say that before, right? You cannot use an estate. You can use an estate for an endowment, right? Because that's future and you're preparing for the future. You cannot count an estate for a new building. Why? Pardon?
You don't know when they're going to...
You don't know when you're going to get it, and the contractor's going to want to be paid, right? And not only is the contractor going to want to be paid, but you're going to have financing if you have a part of it that has to be mortgaged. And so, if that person, if a person writes a will for you, they're going to live 30 years. In 30 years, that's not, you're going to wind up having operational problems, right? If you understand that, right? So you cannot mix sessions 4 and 5. They don't work together, and many people have made that mistake. But people can give cash gifts, right, from their pension funds, or they can draw on their funds early and help you out enormously. So very much like what I was recommending in terms of the stewardship programs, it's all relational, and in a campaign you have to ask and thank, and you have to tell. So your steering committee, in cooperation with your consultant, using the pastor when the pastor is helpful. Sometimes friends can call on friends, right? And get significant commitments. And you go and you meet with a person or a couple, and you have to do some research before you go to them, right? Now, you may not know what they're worth, right? But here's where you have to, this is why the pastor and the congregation needs to know what people are given. Because usually in a campaign, you think of what, 10 times the gift? So if we give, 13,000, or maybe 2 or 3 times a gift, you use a multiplier, right? If we give our congregation $13,000 a year, they could come and they could ask us for 50 or something like that, right? That we could do over a period of time. You've got to use a multiplier, but you have to know what people are giving and what their capacity is, and to whom they give and how they give. And you understand, right? I mean, there are some people who only give set amounts. I mean, they can be very affluent people, and they only give. They only give $1 million to a cause. They only give $100,000 to a cause. And again, remember I told you the tipping point comes into play. They're not, a person who means is not going to give you as much as they would give their college, right? In a campaign. So you have to make sure you're in the right range. So you do your research, you ask, and you always go 2 by 2. You have to go 2 by 2 because and you always pre-plan. So any of you who have been victims of my asks, I don't see too many here, know that when my development person and I would go somewhere, we would rehearse the visit with every possibility that we could think of. I mean, what if the person says this? Well, then we'll say this. What if the person says this? Then we'll say this. We never went unprepared. And we always had a strategy that let's say we walked into a couple and we were going to ask them for $100,000, right? And the meeting starts with, "My sister died last week." Do you think we were going to ask? No, right? Nothing could be more callous, right? Or we plan to ask, we go visit, I lost a ton of money in a bad business deal. Say, do you think we're going to ask? No, that was a signal. They know why you're there. You've announced it. You've told them, right? And they're telling you, now's not the time. So you don't. That's one of the, right? That's one of the scenarios. And then, you visit, you exchange pleasantries, right? You socialize for a while, and then, then the game begins, right? They know why you're there. You know why you're there. In nonprofit circles, usually the development person does the ask, the professional makes the case. So in a congregation, what I would suggest in the capital campaign is the pastor makes the case, and the friend, so you try to go with a friend, right, who belongs to the same club, or, has a, so if the son of a gun says no, he's going to pay, right, with his friend. I was in many situations where I would visit somebody in a capital campaign, and I said, I'm not going to go, I'm not going to do the ask, right? And the donor would say, yeah, but he is, right? So they know, right? Anybody who's a seasoned giver knows, how campaigns are done. And so you rehearse, a range of possibilities, and then you've already figured out, you might have a number of 100,000, then you'd suddenly change it to 50, right? Or they might have said, my business is doing spectacular, spectacularly well, and or whatever, right? Or I just inherited, a ton of money from my, all of which we don't know, right? A ton of money from my relative. It might go up to 150, right? But what you usually come with, and you may not want to be this sophisticated, in most nonprofit worlds you are, and that is with a proposal. So, and you might have 2 of them, right? Or 3 of them. Has the case, talks about the relationship of that person to the congregation, right? You've been a member, your family have been members, right? We confirmed your kids, it might not have been that, right? But it talks about what that person has meant. Your name is on 5 pews, right? So because they've had a history of giving, right? And then one page is the proposal, is the ask. We would like you to, we would like you to give, the lead gift, right? It could be 1/3, it could be a half of the whole project, if the person has that capacity. For the Brosman Center, it was named Brosman after the sister of the donor, Ann Swigert. She started out as a switchboard operator in her father's communications firm. This is the Brosman Center, which is at the Lutheran Seminary, right? And she named it after her school teacher. The Brosman Center is named after her school teacher sister, right? Who never really made that whole much money, but she wanted to have it named after her sister, right? And she pledged $3 million. The reason I bring up Ann Swigert, who passed away not long after she made the gift, is she said to us after we did the ask, and just so you understand where it was in my living room. We arranged a whole event for her with many other people there. We knew she was a manipulator. She knew what we were up to. But she wasn't the only person there. But we cultivated her in an event and did the ask. Her response was, "Thank you." And you know why? Her name is all over the East Coast on educational buildings. A Lutheran institution never asked her for money. And she was a Lutheran her whole life. She said no Lutheran institution ever asked her for money. Now, in part, and I'm coming to an end, John, in part, she was not right, because a number of Lutheran institutions had asked her for money, but they didn't ask money, they didn't ask what was appropriate for her to give. All right? And she told us afterwards, some institutions gave her a range of gifts. They would say, we want to do, and this is why I told you, you have to be clear, right? we want to do 3 things, right? And one of them costs $10,000, one of them costs $100,000, and one of them is going to cost $500,000. Which one would you like to do? And she told us, I'm a businesswoman. Guess what I told them? I'll do the $10,000, right? She was insulted. You with me? She was insulted by the ask because they hadn't done any research. She has buildings around the whole East Coast that she has built. So the ask has to be appropriate. But when you ask, you have to sort of say, now, we don't really know what the right ask is. You've got to be humble, right? And you don't, right? We don't want to insult you by asking too little. We don't want to over-ask. Nobody's ever insulted by asking too much. So we think you should give $500,000, and really make a significant impact on this Christian education way. And then you shut up. The rule in asking is the first person to speak after the ask loses. All right? Except if the donor says yes, then they win because it's the joy of giving, right? They get the pleasure of giving. But if there's silence, and of course you just asked for $500,000, right? The person's got to think, right? And may not say yes. The person may say, oh my gosh, I have to talk to my financial consultant, right? I'll think about it. They didn't say no, right? But you shut up. Because if you say, as a lot of people will do when there's silence, oh, if you do 250, that'll work too.
You lose the clarity.
Right?
Right. But that's not what you want. You want 500.
Right.
You don't want the 250.
So you shut up.
Exactly.
And you pray and you leave. All right? Because you've just done a mighty ask. And you let them think about it. And then before you leave, you say, can we call you in a few days? Follow-up is critical. One final thing on capital campaigns, and then we'll call it a day unless you have some questions. And that is, you might want to do group events, right? So that you gather a group of the congregation and you say, our goal for this group is 50,000, right? Is that going to get you 50,000? No. You've got to call on them afterwards. You have to follow up with every one of them because they're coming for a free meal and an ask. They're committed, right? But unless you ask them afterwards, how much you're going to be very disappointed unless you know what I'm saying? Unless you follow up and contact each one. And then after you've done an ask, you're going home, you need to decide who's going to call that person. Because if you've just asked, let's say, for 100,000, right, and the person doesn't hear from you for a month, what are they going to say? Well, I got off, right? They obviously didn't want that. So with it, you have to ask them, when can I call on you? Right? So I have to talk to my financial advisor. When can I call on you? Right? And then, after you've gone through the silent phase and you've raised, John, what would you say? At least half, right? These days it's probably more that you have that secure. Then you open it up to what you're called a pyramid, right? How many donors do you need at 25,000? How many do you need at 10,000? How many do you need at 5,000? How many do you need at $100, right? And then you go to work, on the rest of the congregation to meet your goal. And then when you reach it, and you'll in those ways you usually exceed it, right? Then you celebrate. But make sure, after you celebrate and during your celebration, that you say thank you. Which I want to say to all of you for sitting through all of this all day long. So thank you.